Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Enterprise Class Disaster Recovery for Virtual Infrastructures on Flash Storage. Today we're joined by Jennifer Gill, Director of Product Marketing at Zerto, and Brian Schwartz, Director of Product Marketing at Pure Storage. Before I hand it over to our presenters, I'd like to remind you that we really like to keep these sessions interactive. Please be sure to enter any questions or comments into the questions console of the GoToWebinar platform. We'll have time at the end to answer these live. And now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
So I think the problem that Zerto and Pure are trying to address is production applications and production workloads really require robust performance and protection. And as you add layers in the infrastructure, like a virtualization layer, things can get complicated and complex in terms of BCDR, and these highly transactional applications also require a strong foundation. And legacy storage arrays with their legacy replication methods can really undermine the virtualization strategy that you've laid out for your business. So with that, we have Pure Storage and Zerto Virtual Replication better together. So Pure Storage really delivers on the promise of virtualization at the best cost. So it's built for your tier one, your production workloads, and enables you to scale higher, consolidate more, and really optimize that performance and cost ratio that you're looking for. With Zerto Virtual Replication, it was purpose-built for your virtualized workloads. It gives you automation for BCDR processes, reducing errors that can occur in manual process, simplifying management, enabling you to protect at the VM level and exceed your SLAs. And if you kind of look at Pure Storage features and functionality and Zerto Virtual Replication features and functionality, you see a lot of alignment in terms of the goals. So both are highly scalable, enabling you to support your growing VMware environment because you're always adding VMs and you're always adding storage. Very, very simple in terms of management, so you can leverage the vSphere client. Again, when we talk about production workloads, we talk about high-performing data, and we need high-performing data reduction. So we have compression, throttling, and dedupe across the board there to help with that. And then automation. And I discussed that earlier as being key because as you have a growing environment, you know, any kind of manual process you have that's really going to drag down in your IT resources. So Pure has automated several key features as well as Zerto. And the installation is fast for both products, because you've made these investments in these new products and you want to take advantage of their innovations and get the benefits from them. You know, and many other legacy systems have very long deployment cycles. With Pure Storage and Zerto Virtual Replication, you are not going to see that. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about Pure Storage.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're excited to partner with Zerto here at Pure Storage to help customers with the process of moving tier one apps into a virtualized environment and making sure they get tier one performance and tier one protection. So if you go to the next slide, Jennifer. Pure Storage is built as an all-flash array for the enterprise. If you look at the consistent performance you get out of Flash, it's going to allow you to virtualize a larger number of tier one applications and leave behind the legacy of disk-based latency that exists for traditional storage arrays, and often it exists inside of a hybrid array when you run past the small amount of flash that often exists. So the first thing to know about a Pure Storage environment, it's an all-flash array, 100% MLC flash. We use MLC to drive down the cost of the environment, and we use great software to basically give you the resiliency and consistent performance while keeping the cost effective, so you can really take it to a wider scale inside of your environment. In terms of part of our mission is we want to produce flash at less than the cost of tier one disk, and fundamental to that strategy is the use of various and several deduplication and compression technologies. These are always enabled. They're global in nature across the entire array. So all volumes and all blocks in the environment are being compressed and deduped, and we're looking for pattern matching. And it's done in a fairly aggressive way, all the way down to looking for small 512 byte blocks to be deduped. So it's a really aggressive implementation that we often see in our average customer environment, a data reduction ratio of 5:1. It, of course, varies on your workload, but if you can imagine a 5:1 reduction in your data set, it really drives down the cost of a flash storage array. So the dollars per usable gig is competitive with Tier 1 storage. The other thing that's really important about deduplication and compression is it helps us reduce the wear leveling on the MLC flash we use. For any of you who've looked at flash-based storage devices, it's really about managing the right wear leveling that exists on the drives, both for performance and for resiliency and kind of longevity reasons. Aggressive use of data reduction technologies helps us reduce the writes to the drives and helps us give mission-critical reliability and longevity to our system. I'm going to talk more about some of our non-disruptive operations and scalability in our software in the subsequent slides. So if you can go forward, Jennifer. We recently expanded the product line here at Pure Storage, both on the software and on the hardware side. So we're really excited to have a broad all-flash array product line at this point. We introduced the 405 and the 450. The 405, we often refer to it as our small but mighty solution. It's a great way for people to try out the product line, to buy in at a low cost. It also has a low footprint, so it has a small size, and it has a very reasonable amount of capacity of an average usable capacity of 40 terabytes. We also introduced the FA450 recently, which is our highest end all-flash array. It has an estimated usable capacity of up to 250 terabytes usable, so it can fit a lot of Tier 1 applications, mixed with virtualization. It's really an enterprise class solution at this point. We're also happy to add the ability to have 16 gig fiber channel connections. So for the most aggressive and demanding workloads out there, Tier 1 applications, moving on to virtualization environments, we'll have the ability to give adequate bandwidth to these workloads as well. And we're also very excited to have introduced the Purity 4.0 software. We're going to talk a bit about some of the snapshot and replication technologies which are relevant to a business continuity and disaster recovery solution. But in addition to that, we're also excited that we're going to be introducing Microsoft VSS integration. We've also recently introduced a REST API to enable automation and integration capabilities into a larger scale business continuity and disaster recovery solution. The next slide, please. I mentioned non-disruptive operations as an important aspect of our offering. This is really critical if you're thinking about moving Tier 1 applications, onto an all-flash virtualized solution. It's something there's been a lot of investment here at Pure Storage around, and we consider it to be absolutely critical for what we consider to be the next phase of the storage industry. If you look at the capabilities we offer, you have the ability to add storage shelves, some non-disruptive capacity expansion. The Purity software will dynamically take advantage of this new capacity. There's no relayout required, by the customer or the application administrators. It's just, used, I'll say automatically. You can also non-disruptively do a performance expansion. So this really refers to, upgrading the controller. So let's say you started with the FA405 and at a later point, loved it and wanted to put more applications onto a flash solution to take advantage of the, performance benefits and data reduction capabilities. You could seamlessly upgrade a 405-based system to a 420-based system, or a 420-based system all the way to a 450-based system. This is done while the applications are up and running, so it's truly non-disruptive in nature. We obviously have non-disruptive hardware replacement, so if there's ever an SSD failure or a controller failure, you basically can replace any of these hardware components. We also offer the ability to non-disruptively upgrade the Purity software itself. And the beautiful thing about the design of the Purity architecture is this is done with zero performance loss. So essentially you could, most folks are familiar with, scheduling downtime in, the middle of the night on a Saturday or something. You can literally, do these at a much more reasonable time frame, and not see any application impact of doing these performance or capacity expansions. So we consider this to be a perfect fit for a virtualized environment where people are very comfortable and familiar with, moving VMs with vMotion and things like that, while the applications are running. We're essentially offering the same type of capabilities inside of our all-flash array. Next slide, please. So for snapshots, inside of our Purity software, we have an offering that we call Flash Recover, which is a combination of snapshot and replication technologies. And we really believe that Flash fundamentally changes how people are going to think about snapshots. Because there's no spindles inside of our system, which are really the performance, hindrance on a lot of application environments, you can think about taking a lot more snapshots. You're essentially not having to do reservations or planning or architecture about, separating out different applications onto different spindles. You're really just creating another set of metadata inside of our Purity software. And this is essentially happens instantly at the time you create a snapshot. Literally, it's a milliseconds or seconds operation. It doesn't determine on the, the size or the amount of data inside the volume itself. And this really gives you a lot of operational flexibility to schedule more snapshots. They're being, our data reduction is being taken into account. So literally, you don't get any storage overhead with snapshots as well. And you have the ability to basically recover any snapshot into a volume, roll it forward, roll it backward, make snapshots writable at any time you want. It's really an incredibly flexible system. And we believe and have seen in a lot of, DevOps environments and environments where people want to take large numbers of snapshots for, QA and pre-production environments, that it's really easy to do in an all-flash environment, and in particular with how we've chosen to implement our snapshot technologies. And this is a foundation for any kind of good business continuity and disaster recovery, kind of foundation. If you move to the next slide, Jennifer, this is also the foundation for how we do replication inside of a Pure Storage environment. So in 4.0, the real massive, enhancement that was done to the system was to enable replication inside of our system. And it's a snapshot-based replication solution. So it basically uses the snapshots I referred to on the last slide as the foundation. These can be scheduled, and you can do essentially, up to a minute granularity. And those snapshots are, already compressed and deduped, and that really helps us because the replication that's essentially going to send that snapshot over to a remote, Pure Storage array, the data's already been compressed and deduped. So this saves on the amount of, bandwidth that's used over your WAN links, and also, makes it effective to get large amounts of data across the wire as subsequent snapshots come down. And of course, at the secondary site, the snapshots have also been compressed and deduped. So it's really the data reduction applies locally, it applies at the remote system, and it also applies on the wire. And at the remote site, any of the snapshots are, mountable into a volume, so you can basically use these for, any kind of use case for, business reporting, test dev. There's, a wide amount of flexibility in terms of the operational model. And we support a number of, topologies. So you can do a simple, picture like we're showing here with two storage arrays, a primary and a secondary. You could do both sites being active. So for different volumes, you're going to replicate them in both directions at the same time. We can do one-to-many or many-to-one or even many-to-many topologies. So you might use FA405s, our small controllers at smaller data centers, all being replicated to, let's say, your primary data center where you may have an FA450. It really allows you to have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you think about your data protection and business continuity and disaster recovery foundations. And an important part of this is how all of this is configured. We take simplicity of configuration to be a core tenet of what we're trying to deliver. And this is all set up through what we refer to as protection policy. So you're going to create a consistency group that can span volumes and can span hosts and host groups. And you're going to determine how frequently you want the snapshots to be taken. And it also includes variable retention rates for the snapshots, both at the primary and the secondary site. So you can choose to, let's say, save one snapshot an hour at the primary site for the first day, and then, one snapshot a day for subsequent days for the next 7 days. And you could have a different retention policy for snapshots at the remote site. And this is all automated through a very simple setup. There's actually a 5-minute video on our website that basically shows the UI itself. I would encourage you to take a look at it after this webcast. It's a great way to really see how simple it is to set up and manage our flash recovery protection policies. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jennifer to talk about how we work with Zerto Replication.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. So just in case some of you aren't familiar with Zerto, so we're a virtual-aware, software-only enterprise solution for automated replication recovery of production workloads. And when I say virtual-aware, what I mean by that is we replicate at the VM and VMDK level. So we're not as concerned with what's underneath there, but we do have a couple use cases that kind of articulate how the two solutions work together very, very well. So take a quick look at our architecture. Here I have a simple overview, and I say simple because here we have 2 sites, and Zerto is able to do replication between multiple sites. So you have the Zerto Virtual Manager. That's the only piece of software that you'll touch, and you'll see similar to the Pure client, it integrates right into vCenter Server. So you keep everything centralized, so you're continuing to go to that same interface. And then on each ESX host, you'll add a Zerto Virtual Replication appliance. And this is what's going to take care of the replication of the data. So we can replicate from anything to anything, highly scalable, aligning with that message of Pure Storage. So the Zerto Virtual Replication appliance, just as you add another ESX host, you just add another virtual replication appliance. So it's continuous block level replication, so we can deliver RPOs of seconds. Very, very little performance impact. I have Next Stage Medical as a customer. They said they didn't even notice when they installed the virtual replication appliances. But we have done some benchmark testing, and depending on the transactions of the application, it's 2 to 5%. We have point-in-time recovery to offer continuous data protection. So this is essentially a journal. So it's 1 hour up to 5 days worth of data. Very, very granular in terms of the replication points. So you'd have, one at 4 o'clock, one at 3:59, 56 seconds, one 5 seconds before that, one maybe 7 seconds before that, and you'd have that up to 5 days worth of data. So really helpful to recover from like logical failures or other things that may have disrupted the environment. So for example, if you did an update today at 1 o'clock, you upgraded something, patched something, now the application isn't working quite as well, it seems a little off, you can just roll it back to 12:59 and 58 seconds and undo that patched update. And I'm going to go into the automation a little bit in another slide, but this is how we deliver our RTO of minutes. So we have fully automated failover, failback, and DR testing. Okay, so our unit of protection is called a virtual protection group. So this is a group of virtual machines that make up an application. And so like the app server, the database server, and the web server. So you can put those together in a group, and Zerto will know, okay, those VMs need to be protected exactly the same no matter where I move them in the environment. So if you do things like DRS or HA and you do move your VMs around, and sometimes that can break replication with other legacy solutions, you'll find that Zerto is able to be aware of those changes and can continue on and protect that policy for you. It gives you a consistency group so you can recover to a consistent point in time, and enables you to recover the applications, not just the data itself. Okay, so now the automation piece. So all the data is getting replicated over to your secondary site, and when you need to fail over, within that virtual protection group, you've set things up like boot order, re-IPing, and things like that, so it builds those VMs very, very fast. I was presenting last week at the Charlotte VMUG with Premier Healthcare, and from his perspective, he was a system administrator, so he's like, we get the data on the secondary site. From a failover perspective, we're done. The application team was not really good friends with him at that point, but now that they have Zerto, they're able to build the applications for them, and the application team is spending many hours going through, building the apps, getting QA involved, testing. Now that whole process is reduced to about 1 hour is the longest it's taken them to QA, and they have 600 virtual machines. The click to test anytime, so when you re-IP for production, you can also set up a re-IPing for a test network. So it's done non-disruptively. You can do this during the day. While testing is happening, replication is still occurring. And in the off chance you have to fail over because something happened while you're in the middle of a test, you can stop the test and fail over. And then we have an offsite cloning feature that you can leverage for backup. And actually just last week, we announced offsite backup, where you're able to take a backup from the secondary data center. So you can remove the backup infrastructure from your primary data center, and it takes full copies. You know, it's not a full backup product. We don't have deduplication, things like that. But if you just require full backup that you need to retain for a year, this might be a good option for you. Okay, simple management from anywhere. I won't belabor the point because we already discussed that. It plugs right into vCenter. We also have a browser-based plugin. And as I mentioned, we can replicate between multiple sites. So we have a truly multi-tenant solution, so you can replicate from many sites to one shared infrastructure. We're able to have bi-directional replication because many organizations today don't have a dedicated DR site because of the cost. So they have both sites that are production, and maybe they replicate between each other 50% one way, 50% back the other. So Zerto is able to support that configuration. And we can replicate internationally. We have a customer who's replicating from Texas to Dubai. Their RPO is 35 seconds. And we have local and remote support. So if you want to do replication within a single vCenter, that's logically in one vCenter, but maybe physically two separate sites, we're able to support that as well. And then lastly, we have many, many cloud providers if you would like to work with them as well. So you can do disaster recovery to the cloud. Okay, and with that, we have a couple of use cases for you. And I think that Brian is going to cover the first one.
So if you look at the, business continuity disaster recovery, the first use case is essentially one where you have, Pure Storage running at both locations. You essentially have virtual machines on top, and you're going to use Zerto to basically protect a subset of the virtual machines themselves. So it's a way to kind of space efficiently, virtualize tier 1 applications that might not have been virtualized in the past. One of the biggest challenges to virtualizing tier 1 apps has often been around storage performance. We believe that through consistent, latency and the high bandwidth and high IOPS that we can deliver on a Pure Storage FlashArray, that all of these tier 1 apps now are really candidates to be virtualized and to move into an environment which gives you a lot more flexibility and agility. And in particular, when you have tier 1 apps, you need business continuity and disaster recovery, which is where a good partnership and the use of Zerto gives you a lot of flexibility to handle this.
Okay, great. And then, so for the second use case, both of us realize that, you have legacy systems, but they still might be under maintenance, so you might not be in a position to replace those yet, but you do want to evaluate Pure Storage. So you can get Pure Storage for your mission-critical applications, your production workloads, and move your legacy storage to your secondary data center. And then as it ages out, you're able to replace that legacy storage, but still have robust CDR for those production applications, because Zerto can replicate from anything to anything. And additionally, because Zerto can replicate from anything to anything, it enables very simple migrations, so that once you do want to expand your Pure footprint, it's a very, very easy process. I have a customer, Tenkata, who is able to migrate a 300 gigabyte ERP application from California to Atlanta. He started the move at 5 o'clock on Friday and was done by 10 past 5 on Friday. So ready for any kind of cloud implementation that you are looking for.
Great. I think that concludes the presentation time. Now let's move on to a few questions. The first one is for Brian at Pure. When we were talking about the use cases, a third question on use case came up. So what is the recommended solution for a hybrid environment, partly virtual servers and partly physical?
So, if you think about, protecting a business service, and I use the term business service to mean, multi-tier applications can be fairly complex. So in a lot of environments, they don't have 100% virtualization today. So you might have a business service that you consider to be your most important, application in the environment that is partly virtualized and also partly still runs on physical operating systems. And in this case, you really have solutions where you can use, Pure Storage-based replication for obviously all of your physical servers, right? On a volume basis, we can, replicate the data for any host or host groups. You could also, use kind of the big club and basically replicate the entire virtualization environment. But in many cases, maybe the tier 1 application is a certain set of VMs that you want to carve off and replicate, and there's other VMs that you're not going to replicate, which is really where Zerto would come in. So you're going to have the opportunity to basically, replicate both, physical and virtual environments with a combination of, Zerto Virtual Replication and Pure Storage as well. So the best way to think about it is, Pure Storage essentially is a storage array and does, volume-based replication, and there's consistency groups. But if you want VM level granularity, Zerto is going to provide you with that solution today, and that's why we're excited to be here talking to them about, combined solutions for our customers, for our joint customers, of which we have several today. And we're excited to, obviously be talking to you about, additional deployments.
Fantastic. All right, Jennifer, this one's for you. How does Zerto compare with SRM?
Yes, we get that question a lot. So Site Recovery Manager is just an orchestration tool, so you need something else to do the replication. So you have that kind of complexity where you're managing two products together. So with Zerto, you have the automation and replication all in one solution. It makes things quite a bit easier, and you get a little bit more flexibility in terms of the performance, and also with it aligning, because depending on the type of replication you use, many people use vSphere replication, so you're not going to get the very aggressive service levels that production workloads require. And so it's really the alignment there, everything in one solution. So that's probably the main difference.
Perfect. All right, another one for Brian. Why is the capacity of the 450, and they're talking about the Pure Storage model 450, why is that capacity estimated and not fixed?
It's a great question. So, I talked about the 250 terabytes usable. That number really depends on the data reduction rates you're going to get with your data set. So the system itself has 70 terabytes of physical capacity of raw. But as I mentioned, we often see, easily, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, or higher data reduction ratios, which is really why you get to one of those larger usable capacities. So the unfortunate thing is it varies a little bit based on your data set. I can't give you a crisp answer that it only, can go up to a certain size. We do have some environments, in particular, if you think about VDI environments, virtual desktop environments, where we get much higher than 5 to 1 data reduction ratio. So a 10 to 1 or a 20 to 1 reduction ratio is not uncommon in a VDI environment. So we give that 250 terabytes as an estimated usable, really for sizing purposes. There is a lot more information about this, about how we do data reduction on our website under the Flash Reduce part of our website that talks about you often get, I'll say, roughly 2 to 1 on average for compression. And then the data reduction also includes the data deduplication, finding 512 byte or larger blocks that are duplicated across the data sets that can drive that number much, much higher. So you often have 2 or 3 to 1 as a baseline for data deduplication. So the combined is really 5 to 1, but the data deduplication can actually go a lot higher. So it varies a lot based on your application. I also want to mention that we don't have any fixed metadata scale limits inside of our system. We don't have to have all of our metadata kept in RAM inside the controller, which there are some other architectures out there that do have those limits. We actually have a much more scalable design for our adaptive metadata inside of our system. So the 250 terabytes is an estimated, but it does vary based on your data set, and frankly can go much higher, or in some cases if you wrote all non-compressible, non-deduplicable data, which there's very few data sets that look at that, could actually go lower. But it really depends on your data set. I would encourage you to look at the Flash Reduce information on our website and get in touch with a Pure Storage channel partner or field representative to have a longer discussion about your specific environment.
Great. All right, Jennifer, what is the overhead on the ESX host from the virtual replication appliance?
Yeah, so so during the presentation I mentioned Next Stage Medical, so they have, they didn't even notice any overhead when they install the product, but we have done some benchmark testing, so it's like 2 to 5% overhead. But I did want to add one more thing to the previous question, the SRM comparison, just because Brian reminded me when he said to go to his website. We actually have a couple of blog posts which discuss that in more detail, because there are many, many differences. I just highlight kind of the largest one that comes to mind. So I just wanted to point everyone to the blog as well if they wanted to check that out.
Perfect. Another one for you, Jennifer. Does Zerto support Hyper-V?
Yeah, so right now we are VMware only, but we are looking to add another hypervisor before the end of the year.
Awesome. All right, let's do one more for each. And a reminder, if we didn't get to your question on the call, we'll definitely follow up with you both from the Zerto and Pure Storage sides after the webinar. So Brian, what latency is supported with Pure's array-based replication?
So it's a great question. It has to do with the network latency you see between the primary and secondary sites in our replication solution. We've tested up to 300 milliseconds, which in many situations is going to cover across ocean type configurations. We do have a customer who has tested this from the United States to Europe already. So there's 300 milliseconds from a lot of the folks I've talked to is more than enough from a replication latency perspective. So we feel very confident that for almost any situation, as long as you have a reasonable network connection, you're going to be able to use this kind of across any WAN link.
Great, and that actually leads me into the next question for Jennifer. What is the minimum network connection required for Zerto?
Yeah, so a minimum is 5 megabits per second.
Perfect. All right, with that, I think we'll go ahead and give you some time back in your busy schedule